The twisted story of the Kellogg brothers begins not with cereal, but with control. In Battle Creek, Michigan, at the edge of the 19th century, two brothers shared a name but not a destiny. John Harvey Kellogg believed he was saving humanity. Will Keith Kellogg believed he was building something that would last. What followed was not just the birth of corn flakes, but the slow collapse of a family bond under the weight of pride, ideology, and unchecked ambition. John Harvey Kellogg was a man obsessed with purity. He believed the body was a battlefield and pleasure was the enemy. As the head of the Battle Creek Sanitarium, he enforced rigid diets, extreme routines, and moral discipline. Food, to him, was medicine, not joy. Sex, desire, even flavor were seen as corrupting forces. His institution attracted the powerful and wealthy. But behind its clean halls was a man who demanded obedience and control over everything, including his younger brother. Will Keith Kellogg worked in John's shadow. He managed the kitchens, followed orders, and absorbed the endless lectures on health and restraint. Yet Will saw something his brother refused to see. Patients loved one simple accident from the sanitarium kitchen: dry, crunchy flakes made from corn. They were easy, affordable, and people wanted them in their homes, not just in a health institution. To Will, this was opportunity. To John, it was a threat. John wanted no commercialization. He feared profit would pollute his mission. Will wanted to package the flakes, sweeten them slightly, and sell them to the world. That small disagreement cracked open years of resentment. Will felt invisible, used, and dismissed. John felt betrayed, convinced that money would undo his life's work. The argument was no longer about cereal. It was about who had the right to decide the future. When Will finally broke away and founded his own company, success came quickly. Corn flakes entered millions of homes. Wealth followed, and with it power. The mansion Will built stood as proof that his vision had won. Grand halls, manicured grounds, and quiet luxury rose from a product born in conflict. Yet every brick carried the echo of betrayal. The mansion was not just a home, it was a declaration. John responded not with reconciliation, but with lawsuits. He tried to reclaim ownership, to rewrite history, to remind the world that the idea was his. The courts became the final battleground where brotherhood was officially buried. They never truly reconciled. Letters went unanswered. Time hardened anger into silence. Ironically, the fortune built on restraint and routine outlived both men. Breakfast tables across the world repeated their legacy every morning, unaware of the bitterness behind the box. One brother died convinced he had been robbed. The other died knowing success came at the cost of family. This is the twisted truth behind the Kellogg name. A story where innovation fed millions, but pride starved a relationship. Where a mansion stood tall, not as a monument to joy, but as evidence that greatness often grows from conflict, and sometimes from hatred itself. Two brothers bound by ambition, but divided by ego and control, were never truly standing on equal ground, even when they appeared to be walking the same path. From the outside, they looked united by purpose, working side by side within the same institution, under the same name, serving the same cause. But beneath that surface, ambition pulled them in opposite directions, and ego slowly turned cooperation into quiet warfare. The older brother carried the weight of authority like a crown. He believed leadership was not something to be shared, but something to be enforced. His ambition was rooted in dominance over ideas, over people, over outcomes. He did not simply want success, he wanted obedience. Every system he built was designed to reflect his beliefs, and every person within it existed to serve that vision. To him, compromise was weakness, and control was proof of moral superiority. His ego was masked as discipline, and his certainty left no room for dissent. The younger brother's ambition burned differently. It was quieter, more patient, shaped by years of being overlooked. He did not crave control over people. He craved control over his own destiny. While he followed orders, managed details, and carried the operational weight, his mind was always searching for possibility. He watched how people responded, what they wanted, what could be improved. His ambition grew not from authority, but from observation. Yet every idea he held had to pass through his brother's approval, and most never survived that gate. This imbalance fed resentment. One brother spoke and was obeyed. The other worked and was ignored. Ego hardened the divide, turning guidance into command and collaboration into hierarchy. The older brother believed his intellect, and status justified absolute control, while the younger learned that loyalty did not earn respect, only more responsibility without recognition. Over time, ambition stopped being a shared drive and became a competition for validation. Control became the silent weapon. Decisions were centralized, credit was selective, and power flowed in one direction. The younger brother felt trapped within a system that relied on him but refused to acknowledge him. His ambition, once aligned with the family mission, began to rebel against it. He wanted room to act, to build, to decide. The more he pushed, the tighter the grip became. Ego ensured that neither could step back. The older brother could not tolerate being questioned, especially by someone he viewed as subordinate. The younger brother could no longer tolerate being minimized, especially when his contributions were undeniable. Pride replaced trust. Conversations became confrontations, disguised as principles. Every disagreement felt like a challenge to identity. What bound them was the same fire that divided them. Both wanted influence, permanence, and meaning. But one sought it through domination, the other through creation. In the end, ambition did not unite them. It exposed the fragile foundation beneath their relationship. Control strangled cooperation, ego silenced empathy, and brotherhood slowly transformed into rivalry, long before either had the courage to admit it. A health movement that accidentally created a breakfast empire began with ideals so rigid and moralistic that profit was never supposed to enter the conversation. It was not born in boardrooms or factories, but in treatment rooms, lecture halls, and strict dining tables where food was stripped of pleasure and reduced to purpose. The goal was not convenience or taste, but control of the human body through discipline, routine, and restraint. At the center of this movement was the belief that modern society was sick, not just physically, but morally. Illness was blamed on indulgence, desire, and excess. Meat, spices, sugar, and rich foods were considered dangerous, capable of inflaming both the body and the mind. The solution, according to this philosophy, was simplicity. Plain foods, repetitive meals, and strict schedules were meant to calm the body and suppress impulses. Eating was transformed into an act of obedience. Within this environment, meals were experiments. Grains were boiled, baked, dried, and reshaped in endless attempts to create food that was nourishing, bland, and easy to digest. Pleasure was seen as a flaw, so taste was intentionally sacrificed. It was in this atmosphere of relentless trial and error that dry, crisp flakes emerged. They were never designed to be revolutionary. They were designed to be forgettable, something eaten without excitement, fuel rather than enjoyment. But something unexpected happened. Patients liked them. They were simple, light, and convenient. For people subjected to rigid routines, these flakes offered a rare sense of ease. More importantly, they could exist beyond the walls of the institution. Visitors wanted to take them home. Requests grew. What was meant to be a controlled dietary tool began to escape into the outside world. This is where ideology collided with reality. The health movement insisted food should remain pure, untouched by commerce. Selling it felt like contamination, a betrayal of moral purpose. Yet the demand was undeniable. The very people the movement sought to reform were asking for more, not as medicine, but as a daily habit. A product had formed without permission. The accident became impossible to contain. What began as a therapeutic food slowly transformed into a staple. Packaging replaced plates. Distribution replaced prescription. The routine of health became the routine of breakfast. The irony was complete. A movement designed to suppress desire had created something people wanted every morning. As the flakes spread, the original message faded. The strict doctrine softened, the moral language disappeared, and the product took on a life of its own. The empire that rose from it was built not on sermons or discipline, but on repetition and familiarity. Breakfast tables replaced treatment rooms. Boxes replaced beliefs. The health movement never set out to change the way the world ate. It set out to control the body. But in trying to strip food of pleasure, it accidentally created convenience. And convenience, once introduced, proved far more powerful than ideology, religious zeal, moral obsession, and extreme lifestyle rules formed the backbone of a worldview that left little room for balance or mercy. This belief system did not simply guide behavior, it dictated it. Life was divided into pure and impure, acceptable and dangerous, disciplined and corrupt. Everything from what one ate to how one slept, spoke, and thought was subject to moral judgment. Health was not just physical wellness, it was proof of righteousness. At the heart of this zeal was the conviction that the human body was a moral instrument. Every craving was suspect. Every pleasure was a potential sin. Desire was viewed not as a natural force, but as a weakness that needed to be controlled, suppressed, or eliminated entirely. Food, sex, rest, and even emotional expression were monitored under the belief that indulgence led directly to decay, both of the body and the soul. Daily life under these rules was relentless. Meals were plain and repetitive, intentionally stripped of flavor to avoid stimulating appetite or pleasure. Spices were avoided. Sugar was condemned. Meat was treated as a moral hazard. Eating was timed, measured, and supervised. Sleep schedules were rigid. Exercise was mandatory. Personal habits were documented and corrected. Even thoughts were subject to scrutiny through constant lectures and moral instruction. Sexuality became the central obsession. It was treated as the root of nearly all human suffering. Natural urges were framed as diseases that drained vitality and corrupted character. Extreme measures were promoted to prevent temptation, including harsh physical interventions, emotional isolation, and lifelong abstinence. Marriage was tolerated but discouraged. Celibacy was praised as the highest form of discipline. Pleasure of any kind was framed as dangerous excess. Religion amplified this control. Scripture was interpreted not with compassion, but with severity. Faith became a tool for enforcement rather than guidance. Moral failure was treated as personal weakness rather than human struggle. Those who could not conform were shamed, corrected, or excluded. There was no space for individuality, only compliance. These extreme lifestyle rules extended beyond the institution and into every relationship. Authority figures believed they had the right, even the duty, to interfere in private lives. Boundaries were ignored in the name of salvation. Control was justified as care. Obedience was praised as virtue. Resistance was labeled as moral decay. The tragedy of this obsession was its blindness. In the pursuit of purity, empathy was lost. In the quest for control, humanity was stripped away. What began as a desire to heal turned into an experiment in domination. Where discipline replaced understanding and morality became a weapon. Corn flakes were born from an experiment, not a business plan. Created in an environment where profit was almost considered a sin. They emerged from routine trial and error. From long days spent altering grains in pursuit of discipline rather than delight. No market research guided their creation. No vision of shelves, boxes, or global reach existed. What mattered was control of the body, not control of consumers. The kitchen where they first appeared functioned more like a laboratory than a place of comfort. Food was manipulated with purpose, boiled until soft, baked until dry, crushed, flattened, and tested repeatedly. Every experiment aimed to reduce stimulation, to make eating dull enough that desire would fade. Flavor was the enemy. Enjoyment was failure. If food was forgettable, it was considered successful. The flakes appeared almost by accident. Grain left out too long, cooked too dry, rolled too thin, produced something unexpected. Instead of dough, it shattered into crisp pieces. In most kitchens, it would have been discarded. Here, it was served. The result was light, crunchy, and surprisingly satisfying. Not indulgent, but different. Not exciting, but easy. This was not innovation driven by creativity. It was persistence driven by ideology. The flakes were a side effect of obsession, not intention. They were meant to be consumed quietly, without thought, as part of a controlled routine. Yet people noticed them. Patients preferred them. Visitors asked about them. What was meant to disappear into discipline began to stand out. The resistance to turning this experiment into a product was immediate and fierce. To sell it felt like corruption. Commercializing it would mean surrendering control over how it was eaten, why it was eaten, and what it represented. The experiment was supposed to stay contained, confined to the institution and its rules. But demand does not ask permission. One brother saw the flakes as a tool, nothing more. The other saw potential. Where one saw moral risk, the other saw practicality. Where one saw deviation, the other saw opportunity. The flakes themselves were neutral, but the meaning assigned to them changed everything. They had no brand identity, no slogan, no strategy. Their power lay in repetition. Easy to prepare, easy to digest, easy to repeat every morning. That simplicity, born from restraint, made them adaptable to everyday life beyond the institution's walls. Only later did the experiment harden into an industry. Only later did packaging, marketing, and scale transform an accidental food into a habit shared by millions. At the beginning, there was no empire in mind. Just a belief that food should control the body. Ironically, that belief created something that would eventually escape all control, reshaping breakfast forever. One brother's vision of purity versus the other's hunger for success was not a simple disagreement of goals, but a clash of identities. They looked at the same world and saw entirely different threats and possibilities. What one feared would corrupt humanity, the other believed could empower it. Their conflict was rooted not in misunderstanding, but in certainty. Each was convinced he was right, and that conviction left no room for coexistence. For the brother devoted to purity, life was a moral equation. Everything had a correct form and a dangerous deviation. Health was sacred. Discipline was virtue. Control was compassion. He believed the world needed to be restrained, guided, and corrected even against its will. Success, to him, was not measured by reach or wealth, but by adherence to principles. If something became popular, it became suspicious. If it generated profit, it risked moral decay. Purity had to be protected from the chaos of mass appeal. His vision demanded insulation. Ideas were meant to stay within carefully constructed boundaries. Food was medicine, not a pleasure. Systems were meant to shape behavior, not respond to it. The thought of adapting to public desire felt like surrender. To change for the sake of growth was, in his mind, a betrayal of purpose. He wanted influence without compromise, impact without exposure, authority without challenge. The other brother saw the same creation and felt urgency instead of fear. He watched how people responded, how habits formed, how simplicity spread. He understood that usefulness was power. His hunger for success was not driven by greed alone, but by validation. He wanted to prove that his ideas mattered, that his labor had value beyond silent obedience. Success meant independence. It meant escape from being controlled. Where purity demanded stagnation, success demanded movement. He believed ideas should evolve, spread, and meet people where they were. If something worked, it deserved to grow. If people wanted it, it deserved to exist beyond rigid walls. He was willing to adjust, to soften rules, to accept imperfection in exchange for reach. To him, purity without progress was wasted potential. This divide poisoned every decision. One brother guarded the creation like a relic. The other wanted to release it into the world. One saw contamination, the other saw opportunity. Their arguments were never truly about food or methods. They were about ownership of the future. Who had the right to decide what something would become? As success approached, the contrast sharpened. The purist retreated deeper into control, tightening rules and reinforcing boundaries. The ambitious brother pushed outward, breaking limits and redefining purpose. Each move by one felt like an attack to the other. Growth felt like theft. Restraint felt like sabotage. A mansion symbolizing power, pride, and emotional distance did not rise simply as a place to live, but as a statement carved into stone. Every corridor, every towering wall, every carefully chosen detail existed to communicate something unspoken yet unmistakable. This was not just wealth made visible. It was victory made permanent. The mansion stood as proof that one vision had prevailed, that one brother's path had led to dominance, recognition, and independence. Power echoed through its scale. The size alone separated its owner from ordinary life, from shared spaces and shared struggles. It announced authority without words. No one could stand inside it without understanding who controlled the narrative now. The mansion replaced the institution that once controlled him. Where rules had been imposed, now they were written. Where obedience had been demanded, now it was expected. The building itself became an extension of that authority, immovable and unquestionable. Pride shaped every corner. This was not modest success tucked quietly away. It was designed to be seen, remembered, and respected. The mansion did not seek comfort alone, it sought validation. It answered every past dismissal, every ignored idea, every moment of being overshadowed. Each room whispered the same message: I was right. I succeeded. I no longer need permission. Pride filled the silence that reconciliation never could. Yet beneath the grandeur lived distance. Emotional distance stretched wider than the halls themselves. The mansion was spacious, but not warm. It protected its owner from intrusion, from vulnerability, from reminders of the cost paid to reach this height. The separation was intentional. Walls kept people out, but they also kept memories contained. The past, especially the unresolved past, had no place here. Family absence haunted the space more than any presence. The mansion did not host shared laughter born of healing. It did not bridge old wounds. Instead, it solidified them. It stood where reconciliation might have been, turning distance into permanence. What could have been a symbol of unity became a marker of separation. The irony was sharp. Built from success meant to liberate. The mansion also isolated. It replaced one form of control with another, quieter one. Where once authority came from a brother's dominance, now it came from achievement and status. But isolation remained the constant companion. Power had been gained, but connection had been lost. The mansion did not mourn this loss. It did not question it. Buildings do not regret. They endure. And in enduring, it preserved the emotional distance long after the arguments ended and the voices fell silent. Long after both brothers were gone, the mansion remained, standing tall as a reminder that triumph can be magnificent and still deeply lonely. Legal battles that turned family into lifelong enemies began as formal disagreements, but quickly transformed into something far more personal and destructive. What once might have been resolved through conversation hardened into documents, signatures, and courtrooms, where blood ties carried no weight, and every word was chosen to wound. Law replaced dialogue, and in doing so, made reconciliation nearly impossible. At first, the disputes were framed as matters of principle and ownership. Who deserved credit? Who had the right to profit? Who controlled the future of what they had built together? But beneath the legal language lived years of unspoken resentment. Every filing carried old insults. Every claim echoed past dismissals. The courtroom became a stage where decades of rivalry could finally be acted out with witnesses and judgments. Family history was dissected like evidence. Private conversations were reinterpreted as intent. Acts of trust were reframed as manipulation. Each brother was forced to reduce the other to an opponent, not a sibling. In legal terms, there was no room for complexity or shared legacy. There were only sides. Plaintiff and defendant. Winner and loser. The bitterness deepened with every proceeding. Lawyers amplified hostility because conflict strengthened the case. Compromise became a liability. Apologies became admissions of guilt. The structure of the legal system rewarded distance and punished empathy. Even moments of hesitation were swallowed by strategy. Pride demanded victory, not peace. As rulings were made, the emotional cost escalated. Every decision that favored one brother felt like theft to the other. Every loss became proof of betrayal. The law did not settle the conflict, it legitimized it. Hatred was no longer just emotional, it was official, stamped, and recorded. What made the damage irreversible was time. Lawsuits stretched on, giving anger years to mature. Silence replaced communication. Letters went unanswered. Invitations disappeared. Birthdays, illnesses, and milestones passed without acknowledgement. The legal war spilled into personal life, erasing any remaining sense of family. Even when the battles ended, the scars remained active. Victory did not bring closure. Defeat did not bring humility. The relationship was too fractured to be repaired. Trust had been replaced by suspicion so complete that even shared memories felt contested. Wealth built on routine, restraint, and silent resentment did not arrive through bursts of passion or dramatic risk, but through repetition so steady it became invisible. It grew one morning at a time, one bowl at a time, anchored in habits that asked nothing of emotion and everything of consistency. The foundation of that wealth was not excitement, but predictability. Breakfast, repeated endlessly, became a ritual that quietly generated power. Routine was the engine. The product thrived because it fit seamlessly into daily life. It did not demand attention or celebration. It asked only to be there, every morning, without variation. Factories ran on schedules as strict as the beliefs that inspired them. Processes were standardized. Decisions were automated. The absence of chaos allowed scale to flourish. Order became profit. Restraint shaped the identity. The brand's success depended on moderation, simplicity, and control. Flavors were limited. Messages were careful. Excess was avoided, at least in appearance. This restraint echoed the ideology from which it was born, even as the original beliefs faded. The product promised balance, discipline, and health, even as it entered a commercial world driven by consumption. Restraint, once moral, became strategic. Yet beneath the efficiency lived resentment, quiet but persistent. It did not disrupt operations or slow growth. It simmered privately, carried by memories of conflict, betrayal, and unresolved anger. This resentment was never advertised, never spoken publicly, but it influenced decisions. Expansion became proof. Profit became validation. Every success answered an old wound without naming it. The silence around that resentment was deliberate. There was no benefit in revisiting pain. The market rewarded forward motion, not reflection. So the story was simplified. Origins were polished. Conflict was erased. What remained was a clean narrative of innovation and health, free from the emotional cost that shaped it. Silence protected the empire. Ironically, that resentment also fueled endurance. It hardened resolve. It removed hesitation. There was no desire to return, reconcile, or soften. The past was something to outrun, not confront. Routine made that possible. Day after day, repetition buried emotion beneath productivity. This wealth did not celebrate joy. It tolerated it. It valued discipline over delight, control over chaos. And in that structure, resentment found a place to exist without being acknowledged. The empire stood tall not because the wounds healed, but because they were ignored long enough to turn into momentum. What emerged was prosperity built on stability, restraint, and unspoken conflict. A fortune that grew quietly, efficiently, and relentlessly, while the resentment that helped shape it remained hidden, locked into the routine that made it possible. A legacy where success outlived brotherhood is a legacy marked by imbalance. where achievement continued to grow long after the relationship that gave birth to it had collapsed. The name endured, the product multiplied, the influence expanded across borders and generations, while the bond between two brothers faded into something almost unrecognizable. What survived was not unity, but outcome. Success proved resilient in ways relationships were not. Companies adapt. Brands evolve. Systems outlive their creators. Brotherhood, however, requires care, humility, and repair. When those disappeared, there was nothing to sustain it. While factories expanded and routines spread into millions of homes, silence settled permanently between the men who made it possible. Progress moved forward without them moving toward each other. Time favored the legacy, not the relationship. Each passing year strengthened the empire, while weakening the memory of shared beginnings. What was once a joint effort became a single narrative, streamlined and simplified for public consumption. The story of collaboration was replaced by the story of triumph. Brotherhood became a footnote, mentioned briefly, if at all. The success rewrote identity. One brother became a symbol of innovation and industry. The other became a shadowed origin, acknowledged but distant. Public recognition froze them into roles that left no space for reconciliation. Admitting regret would complicate the myth. Revisiting pain would interrupt momentum. It was easier for success to move on alone. Emotionally, the cost was irreversible. There was no final conversation, no shared reflection, no quiet moment of understanding. Pride held firm. Distance became permanent. Even as age softened ambition, it did not soften memory. The hurt remained unresolved, carried privately to the end. After their deaths, the imbalance deepened. The legacy continued to grow without resistance. Profits rose. Influence widened. Meanwhile, brotherhood existed only in archives, biographies, and speculation. What was once living and fragile became historical and fixed. The opportunity for healing vanished entirely. This is the cruel symmetry of such a legacy. The thing they built together became immortal, while the relationship that built it did not survive. Success proved stronger than blood. Structure outlasted sentiment. And the world inherited a name, a habit, and a fortune, without inheriting the fractured bond that made them possible. What remains, after all the ambition, conflict, and achievement, is a truth far heavier than success itself. The world remembers the name, repeats the habit, and consumes the legacy daily, yet rarely pauses to consider the cost buried beneath it. Two brothers set out to change lives, and in doing so, lost each other. The empire they created proved that ideas can outlive people, that systems can thrive without harmony, and that victory does not require peace. This story is not just about wealth or innovation, but about the quiet tragedy of choosing control over connection, pride over reconciliation. Long after the voices faded and the arguments ended, the legacy marched on alone, powerful and enduring, carrying with it the unanswered question of whether success is still a triumph when brotherhood is the price.